The small hall was alive with quiet chatter as people settled into wooden chairs, the faint scent of coffee and polished wood filling the air. The sun had begun to dip low outside, casting golden streaks through the tall windows and warming the faces of those inside. It was an ordinary evening. At least that's what everyone thought. Local musicians had gathered to share a few tunes, mostly familiar pieces, and the community had come for a casual night of music and conversation. No one expected anything extraordinary. Among the crowd, she arrived quietly, carrying nothing but a small bag slung over her shoulder. She was not someone people immediately noticed. Her hair was loosely tied back, and her clothes were simple, comfortable, nothing flashy. There was a calmness about her, a gentle smile that seemed to suggest she belonged to the room in the softest way possible, as if she had always been part of the background. She did not rush, she did not look around for attention, and she certainly did not demand it. She simply found an empty chair near the back and took a seat, her eyes scanning the room in a quiet, thoughtful way. The audience had been enjoying the casual rhythm of the evening. One by one, local performers had taken their turns. A young man played a simple guitar tune that drew polite claps. A pair of teenagers sang a familiar song, their voices slightly off, but the effort earned them gentle cheers. It was a night built on comfort, on familiarity, a reminder that music could be a simple pleasure. When the organizer approached the small piano in the corner and announced that the next performance would be something light, everyone assumed it would be another casual, easy-going piece. The woman from the back rose quietly, her movements graceful but unassuming. There was a soft murmur among the audience as she walked slowly toward the piano, not with confidence meant to impress, but with a kind of ease that made it clear she was comfortable with the instrument. As if it were an old friend waiting for her, she paused at the bench for a moment, resting her hands on her lap and taking a small breath. The room fell slightly quieter, not out of expectation, but out of curiosity. People noticed her presence differently than the other performers. She did not look like someone who was about to dazzle an audience. There was no dramatic gesture, no bow, no bold announcement. She simply smiled and sat down, the kind of smile that invited people to relax, to listen. Her hands hovered over the keys for a moment, and then she pressed the first note. It was soft, delicate, almost like the sound of water trickling over smooth stones. The audience leaned in, some subconsciously, drawn to the subtlety of the music. The tune was simple at first, familiar even, like a song that had been heard before, but carried a new warmth this time. There was something about the way she played that made each note linger, just a fraction longer than expected, like a secret waiting to be discovered. At first, the audience thought it was just a gentle, pleasant piece, the kind that fills a room with calm. But then, slowly, the notes began to carry a depth that people did not expect. Each chord seemed carefully chosen, perfectly balanced, flowing naturally yet with purpose. The music had a rhythm that felt alive, like it was telling a story without words. People began to notice that the tune was more than simple. It was alive, breathing with emotion, and somehow it made the room feel smaller and larger at the same time, intimate yet expansive. Some people closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. They could feel the emotion in each note, the care in each movement of her hands. She played with precision, yes, but there was also a softness, a humanity to the performance that made it feel personal. It was as if she were speaking directly to each listener, even though no one knew her, even though no one had ever heard her play before. The simplicity of the first notes had grown into something that demanded attention without demanding it. A quiet authority in sound. Whispers began to circulate, subtle and careful at first, almost afraid to disturb the music. "She plays beautifully," one person said under their breath. "Have you seen her perform before?" asked another. But no one had. She was a stranger, someone they had barely noticed when she entered the room, yet somehow she had captured their attention completely. The beauty of the performance was not loud or flashy. It was honest, genuine, and quietly mesmerizing. The light from the setting sun touched the piano, highlighting the smooth surface of the keys as her fingers danced over them. Each note seemed deliberate, not hurried, and yet not slow either. There was a rhythm to her hands that felt natural, like watching a bird take flight. People in the audience shifted in their seats, leaning forward, unconsciously wanting to be closer to the sound, to see more clearly what was unfolding. There was an energy in the room, subtle but palpable, something that made hearts beat a little faster and minds pause and awed some of the older attendees, who had spent years listening to music in concert halls and small gatherings alike, exchanged glances. There was recognition in their eyes, a silent acknowledgement that what they were hearing was not ordinary. It was rare, the kind of music that seems simple at first, but then reveals itself as complex and full of soul. The younger audience members, too, were captivated, drawn in by the way the music seemed to speak directly to them. Even though they could not name why, she did not glance up at the audience. Her eyes remained soft, focused on the keys, yet there was an ease to her posture, a comfort that spoke of experience. Every movement of her hands was intentional, and yet it never felt mechanical. There was a life to the way she played, a warmth, a vulnerability even, that made the performance feel human in a way that is hard to describe. People could feel it in their chests, in the subtle tightening of emotions, in the quiet smile that tugged at the corners of their lips. A young child sitting near the front stopped fidgeting entirely, mesmerized by the sound. Even the most distracted attendees, who had been checking their phones or talking quietly, found themselves turning their full attention to the piano. There was no flash, no showmanship, and yet somehow the room had shifted. Everyone was holding their breath together, caught in a moment that was unfolding in real time, aware that something rare was happening minutes past, though no one could tell exactly how long. The music seemed to have a life of its own, stretching and contracting in waves, gentle at times, then carrying more weight, then softening again. The woman played without haste, without any hint of struggle, and yet each note felt precise and meaningful. It was as if she had taken years of practice, years of feeling, and distilled it into this moment that now held the room in its grip. The simple tune she had begun with had already begun to transform. What started as something light and familiar now held subtle layers, chords that hinted at memories and emotions people did not even know they had. A sense of nostalgia, of longing, of beauty that is too deep for words, settled over the audience. No one dared move, no one dared cough, as if even the smallest sound would disrupt the magic in the room. By the time she reached the end of the piece, the final note lingered in the air, a delicate echo that seemed to hover for a heartbeat longer than natural. Silence followed, thick and complete, until one by one, the audience began to clap. At first, it was tentative, polite, but soon it swelled into genuine, heartfelt applause. Some people wiped their eyes quietly, not wanting anyone to notice the tears, while others simply stared at the piano, amazed that such sound could come from a single person with no stage, no fanfare, no expectation. She rose slowly, a humble nod of acknowledgement to the room that had witnessed her. There was no grand bow, no flourish, no demand for recognition, just a quiet, sincere smile, as if she had shared something she was meant to share. And that was enough. People continued to clap, some rising to their feet, realizing they had seen something special, something extraordinary in its simplicity. Later, as she packed up her small bag and moved toward the exit, people watched in quiet curiosity, wanting to say something, to ask questions, to understand who she was. But she moved gently, calmly, disappearing into the evening with the same quiet grace that had brought her to the piano. The music lingered long after she had left, not just in the air, but in the hearts of those who had heard it. They would remember this evening, not for the casual gathering it had promised to be, but for the astonishing moment when an unassuming woman had sat down for a simple tune and transformed it into something unforgettable. It was a reminder that extraordinary talent often hides in plain sight, that the quietest among us may hold the deepest treasures, that music, when played from the heart, can touch more than ears, it can touch souls. And in that small hall, with the sun fading and the last echoes of applause hanging in the air, everyone knew they had been part of a moment that would stay with them forever. Long after the notes had faded, the applause had barely settled when the room began to buzz quietly again. People whispered among themselves, some still in awe, others curious to understand how a single person could make music feel so alive. The woman, who had quietly left the piano earlier, had already returned to her seat at the back, blending once more into the audience as if nothing remarkable had just happened. Yet, the energy she left behind lingered, almost tangible, like the faint vibration of a bell that continues to ring even after it has been struck. Some attendees leaned closer to each other, speaking in hushed tones. "Did you feel that? It wasn't just the music. It was something else," one said. "I've heard pianists before, but this was different," replied another, eyes wide with wonder. The words struggled to capture what everyone had felt, because it was not just skill, it was emotion, depth, and an unspoken story flowing through each note. A few people tried to imagine what her life must have been like. How could someone play like that and stay so humble, so quiet? Questions circled in their minds, but no one knew the answers. And yet, in the absence of explanation, the room felt warmer, more alive. It was as if the music had created a connection between strangers, binding them together with invisible threads of shared astonishment. The evening continued with other performers, but the mood had shifted. Each time someone approached the stage, they could feel the lingering echo of the previous performance. It was no longer a casual night of small tunes. People watched more carefully, listened more intently, and even simple songs were now measured against the memory of what they had just experienced. The woman did not perform again that night, but her presence was everywhere. People found themselves glancing at her, wondering if she would play again, secretly hoping she might. There was a sense of anticipation, a quiet energy that hummed beneath the surface. Even those who had come simply for a casual evening of music felt a spark of excitement they could not explain. Something had shifted in the room, and it all began with her simple tune later. As the audience dispersed into the evening air, small groups gathered near the entrance, speaking in low voices. One older man, who had spent decades attending music events, shook his head with a smile. "I've never heard anything like that in my life," he said. "She wasn't just playing notes, she was telling a story. I could feel it in my chest." Others nodded, equally struck. A young woman, clutching her notebook, whispered, "I write music myself, but I don't think I've ever felt a song this way. It wasn't just technical skill, it was life. It was emotion. I don't know how to explain it." Meanwhile, the woman herself moved quietly through the crowd, smiling politely to a few people who recognized her from earlier. She answered questions with modesty, never elaborating on her past or her training. She seemed content to let the memory of the music speak for itself. Yet, there was an undeniable presence in her, a calm confidence that people noticed even if they did not understand it. Over the next few days, the memory of the performance lingered in the community. People spoke of it at the local cafe, in the small library where students studied, and even in the grocery store, as if retelling the story would allow them to relive the moment. The woman's performance became more than just music. It became a symbol of possibility. A reminder that hidden talent can exist anywhere, often unnoticed, waiting for the right moment to shine. Some community members took it further. A few local musicians, inspired by what they had heard, began to practice with renewed dedication. They tried to recreate the feeling, to capture the emotion that had flowed from her fingertips. It was a challenge, of course, because what she had played could not be replicated, at least not fully. The subtlety, the depth, and the personal touch were uniquely hers. But the effort itself brought a new energy to the community, a quiet wave of inspiration that continued to grow out at the same time. Curiosity about her life began to grow. Who was she outside of these brief moments? Why had she remained so humble, so quiet about her talent? Some tried to approach her directly, while others observed from a distance, hoping to catch glimpses of the person behind the music. Yet, she gave little away. She smiled, answered questions politely, and then moved on, never lingering too long in the spotlight. It was clear she played not for recognition, but for the music itself, for the way it could touch people in subtle and profound ways. Meanwhile, the local music community began to notice changes in their own gatherings. People started arriving earlier, sitting closer to the piano, and listening more carefully. The casual atmosphere remained, but there was now an underlying expectation that something special could happen at any moment. The memory of her simple tune had set a new standard, not in terms of technical skill alone, but in the way music could move the heart. Even those who were not musicians felt its impact. Parents spoke to their children about the performance, telling them that talent often hides in quiet places and that humility can accompany greatness. Friends shared the story among themselves, emphasizing how ordinary appearances can conceal extraordinary gifts. It became a tale that everyone wanted to carry forward, a reminder that wonder can exist in the most unexpected places. The woman herself remained unaware, or at least unconcerned, about the growing fascination. She continued to live her life quietly, taking walks through the neighborhood, visiting the small shops she liked, and quietly observing the world around her. To the outside observer, she seemed ordinary in every way, but those who had heard her play knew otherwise. They understood that behind her gentle demeanor and modest smile was a depth of skill and emotion that could captivate anyone lucky enough to listen. One afternoon, she returned to the same hall for another casual gathering. Though this time she intended only to listen, she found a seat near the back and observed the performers with the same calm interest as before. When she played softly for a brief moment, her music seemed to pause. and the room collectively held its breath, anticipating yet another unfolding story through her fingers. Even in the quietest moments, she commanded attention without demanding it, as though the music itself spoke more loudly than words ever could. It was in these small moments that people began to realize that the woman's talent was not just about the notes she played, but the way she connected with people. She had a subtle gift of seeing the heart behind each listener, of knowing when to let a note breathe, when to let silence speak, and when to allow the music to soar. It was a rare ability, one that transcended technical skill and touched something deeper in everyone who heard her. The impact of her music continued to ripple through the community. Children who had been present at her performance began to hum parts of her tune. While playing at home, adults found themselves pausing during their daily routines, recalling the soft echo of her hands on the piano. Even strangers who had heard about her performance began to arrive at community events, curious to witness the quiet magic firsthand. The woman had become more than a musician. She had become a symbol of possibility, of the extraordinary hidden in ordinary life. Some people even began to document her performances, recording the evenings with their phones or taking careful notes in notebooks. They wanted to remember every detail, every subtle shift in tempo, every gentle pause that had made the music feel alive. Yet, even with these recordings, there was something ineffable about her playing that could not be captured fully. The warmth, the presence, the quiet humanity that infused every note remained unique to the moment, impossible to replicate outside the room where it had been performed. Despite all this attention, she remained grounded. She never sought fame or recognition. Her joy came from the music itself, from the quiet satisfaction of creating something beautiful that could touch people in ways they might not fully understand. She was content to let the story of her talent grow slowly, naturally, carried forward by those who had been lucky enough to experience it firsthand. Over time, a sense of anticipation grew for her next appearance, even if it was just a small gathering. People began to understand that moments like these were rare, and that the quiet presence of someone truly gifted could transform an ordinary evening into something unforgettable. It was a lesson not just in music, but in life itself, that greatness often comes quietly, without fanfare, and that sometimes the most profound experiences are found in simplicity. And so, the memory of that simple tune continued to live on. It was no longer just a performance. It had become part of the fabric of the community, a quiet story told and retold, inspiring musicians and listeners alike. Every time someone thought of that evening, they could feel the warmth, the subtle energy, the extraordinary way one person had taken a simple melody and made it unforgettable. The woman herself remained a mystery, and perhaps that was part of the magic. People did not need to know her full story to be moved by her music. They only needed to listen, to feel, and to remember. Each note she played carried a little piece of her, and in sharing it, she had given something priceless to everyone who had been there. In the end, the simple tune that had started as a casual, unassuming moment had grown into something far larger, far more meaningful. It had captured hearts, inspired creativity, and reminded everyone that extraordinary things can happen when least expected. And though she returned to her quiet life, the memory of her playing lingered, a soft, beautiful echo that would remain in the minds of the listeners for years to come. The room had settled into an almost reverent quiet after her previous performance. People were no longer simply listening. They were waiting, aware that something remarkable could happen at any moment. The woman, still calm and unassuming, moved toward the piano once more, this time with a faint smile that suggested a quiet confidence. Her hands hovered above the keys, as if she were reading the thoughts of the audience before pressing a single note. When she began, the music felt different from the last time. It started softly, almost hesitantly, yet each note carried weight, a deliberate emotion that seemed to reach directly into the hearts of those listening. The audience could feel the difference immediately. This was no longer just a beautiful performance. It was storytelling. Each chord, each movement, seemed to convey a message, a narrative that no words could capture. People leaned forward, eyes fixed on the piano in her hands. They watched, fascinated, as she moved effortlessly, each finger finding the perfect key at exactly the right moment. The melody grew in complexity, weaving in unexpected turns, harmonies that created tension and release, a journey that felt both thrilling and intimate. It was as if she was painting pictures with sound, each phrase revealing a new layer of emotion. Some in the audience had heard pianists before, professionals even, but this was different. There was a depth and honesty in her playing that felt rare, almost magical. Every note seemed alive, every pause intentional. Listeners could sense the thought behind each movement, the careful attention to detail, and the freedom of expression that only comes with true mastery. People began to whisper to each other, unable to contain their astonishment. "Have you ever heard anything like this?" one asked. "It's incredible." "She's incredible," another replied. The music started to swell, carrying with it an unexpected power. What had begun as a simple tune now unfolded into a rich, layered composition that seemed beyond her age and appearance. The melody rose and fell like waves, sometimes gentle, sometimes dramatic, yet always flowing seamlessly. People felt their hearts respond involuntarily, some clutching their chests, others closing their eyes, absorbed completely in the experience. The woman's presence was quiet but undeniable. She did not perform for attention. She performed because the music demanded it, because the story in her mind needed to be told. And tell it she did, with every movement of her hands, every subtle shift in rhythm and tone. The audience could feel the intensity, the care, and the emotion she poured into each note. It was as if the room itself held its breath, waiting for her to reveal the next phrase. Even the most distracted listeners found themselves captivated. Children who had been fidgeting moments ago now sat in complete stillness. Adults forgot to speak, forgot to check their phones, forgotten the passing of time. The music had created a shared space where nothing else mattered. Every person in the room felt connected, not just to the music, but to one another, united by the subtle magic of her performance. Her hands moved with a fluidity that was mesmerizing. Each finger seemed to know its place instinctively. Guided by years of experience and an innate understanding of the piano, she transitioned effortlessly between soft, delicate notes and powerful, resonant chords, creating a dynamic range that kept the audience hanging on every sound. The complexity was astounding, yet it never felt forced or mechanical. There was a natural flow, a storytelling quality that made it seem as though the music was living and breathing. As the piece progressed, the audience began to realize that this performance was something far beyond entertainment. It was an experience, a journey through emotion, thought, and memory. Some listeners felt tears prick at their eyes, while others felt a thrill of exhilaration, their pulse quickened by the intensity of the music. Every note seemed to evoke a memory, a feeling, a personal connection. Even though the song was new to all of them, people exchanged glances, some wide-eyed, some shaking their heads in disbelief. "I can't believe someone can play like this," one whispered. "It's not just skill, it's soul," another murmured. The words captured the truth of what was happening. It wasn't just the technical mastery that amazed them. It was the humanity in every sound, the way the music seemed to speak to each listener individually, touching something deep and personal. The woman's performance grew in intensity, each phrase building upon the last. There was a crescendo, a moment where the music seemed to reach beyond the room, as though it could fill the world itself. The audience felt it in their bones, a visceral response that left them breathless. Yet, even in its power, the music retained a subtle delicacy, a sensitivity that reminded listeners that it was not about force, but about feeling. As the piece reached its conclusion, the final notes were gentle, lingering in the air like a soft echo. The silence that followed was profound, almost sacred. For several heartbeats, no one moved, as if afraid to disturb the magic. And then, slowly, applause began, tentative at first, then swelling into a wave of appreciation and awe. People rose to their feet, clapping with genuine admiration, some wiping away tears they hadn't realized had fallen. The woman remained seated for a moment longer, eyes softly closed, as if savoring the music herself. When she finally opened her eyes, she offered a small, modest nod to the audience. There was no fanfare, no dramatic gesture, only a quiet acknowledgement of the connection that had just occurred. It was clear that she did not seek praise. The joy had come from the act of creation itself, from sharing a piece of her heart through the piano. After the applause subsided, people lingered, reluctant to leave. They spoke in hushed tones, recounting the moments that had touched them the most, trying to describe the indescribable. "It felt like she was speaking to me," one person said. "Every note, every pause. It was like she knew what I was feeling," another added. "I've never heard music that moved me like that." Not even close. The effect of the performance extended beyond the hall. Those who had been present carried the memory with them as they returned to their daily lives. Conversations continued to revolve around the woman and her music. Stories riddled with increasing reverence. Even people who had not attended the event heard about it from friends and neighbors, intrigued by the idea that someone so ordinary in appearance could possess such extraordinary talent. The woman herself did not speak much about her background or her training. She moved quietly through the world, unassuming, never seeking recognition. Yet her music left a lasting impression, inspiring others to pursue their own passions, to notice the hidden talents around them, and to appreciate the beauty and simplicity. Her performances became a symbol of quiet brilliance, a reminder that greatness does not always announce itself loudly. In the days and weeks that followed, people continued to reflect on what they had witnessed. Musicians in the community practiced with renewed dedication, inspired by her ability to combine technical skill with emotional depth. Teachers spoke to their students about the importance of expression, of connecting with the heart as well as the instrument. Children who had attended the performance hummed her melodies, unconsciously internalizing the subtle nuances they had heard. Yet, despite all the admiration and attention, she remained grounded. Her focus was never on the applause or recognition, but on the music itself. Every performance was an opportunity to explore, to create, and to connect with those who were willing to listen. She understood that the true power of music lies not in fame, but in its ability to touch lives, to evoke feeling, and to inspire wonder. Her story began to spread quietly, not through headlines or social media, but through word of mouth, from one person to another. People recounted the performance with reverence, emphasizing the way she transformed a simple tune into an emotional journey. Each retelling carried the same awe, the same sense of astonishment, as if everyone had experienced a shared miracle. Through it all, the woman continued her life quietly, appearing at local gatherings, performing occasionally, and listening with the same calm presence she had always displayed. Her impact on the community was profound, yet subtle, like ripples in a pond that gradually spread outward. She inspired without intending to, touched hearts without seeking to, and left memories that would linger for years to come. And so, her music became more than just sound. It became a bridge between people, a shared experience that transcended age, background, and circumstance. Each performance was a reminder that beauty often exists quietly, waiting to be noticed, and that the simplest of actions, a single person playing a tune, can astonish, inspire, and transform an entire community. After that extraordinary performance, life in the community seemed to carry a quiet excitement. People still spoke of her music with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Even days later, her melody lingered in their minds, appearing unexpectedly during ordinary moments: the rustling of leaves, the hum of a passing car, or the soft ticking of a clock at home. It was as if her music had quietly seeped into the rhythm of daily life, reminding everyone who heard it that something extraordinary could exist in the simplest of moments. The woman remained modest and unassuming. She did not seek attention, nor did she desire fame. When she appeared at local events, she did so with a calm presence, smiling politely at those who recognized her. Some approached her directly, curious to know more about her life and her music. Yet, she answered questions briefly, gently, never elaborating on her past or her training. She seemed content to let her performances speak for themselves, confident that the music alone carried the meaning she wished to share. Her next performance was unplanned. It came on a quiet evening at a small community gathering, where the room was filled with families and neighbors who had no idea they were about to witness something extraordinary once again. The piano sat in its usual corner, unassuming and ordinary, but the moment her hands rested on the keys, the atmosphere shifted. There was a subtle hush, a collective pause, as if everyone sensed that something remarkable was about to unfold. The first notes were gentle, familiar, even simple, yet there was an unmistakable depth in her playing. She started slowly, letting the music breathe, allowing the audience to settle into the sound. The melody began to flow, each note carefully chosen, yet seemingly effortless. It was not only the technical skill that captivated people, it was the emotion behind every movement. Each phrase spoke of feeling, of life experiences, and of a heart that understood the power of expression. As the music grew, so did the audience's awareness that they were witnessing more than a performance. It was storytelling through sound, a narrative without words, yet rich with meaning. Some felt joy, others nostalgia, and still others a quiet sadness that they could not name. The beauty of it was that each listener experienced the music in their own way, yet all were connected by the shared presence of the woman and her piano. People began to notice subtleties in her playing that made her performance extraordinary. A pause in the melody was not empty, but full of intention. A brief silence that allowed the listener to reflect, to feel, to imagine. The dynamics of her hands, the soft touch in some chords, the strength in others, created a texture that was rich and alive. Even those who had little experience with music felt the emotional resonance, as though the piano itself had a soul and she was its voice. The audience, once again, was captivated. Some leaned forward in their chairs, breath held, eyes wide. Others closed their eyes, allowing the music to wash over them fully. Children, who often fidgeted or whispered during performances, sat motionless, completely absorbed. The communal energy in the room was palpable. People were experiencing something rare and profound, a sense of connection that went beyond the ordinary. Throughout the performance, the woman remained calm and focused, yet there was a subtle intensity in her posture, in the way her fingers moved over the keys. She seemed entirely present in the moment, her attention fully on the music. There was no distraction, no pretense, only a quiet dedication to the act of creating and sharing beauty. It was this authenticity that resonated so deeply with everyone present. As the melody unfolded, the music evolved into something complex yet seamless. Layers of harmony intertwined with gentle passages, creating a sense of depth and dimension that drew listeners further into the story. There were moments of tension, moments of release, and moments of subtle surprise, unexpected notes that seemed to carry hidden messages, evoking emotions that words could never fully express. People were not merely hearing the music, they were living it. Whispers of admiration began to circulate, soft but insistent. "I don't think I've ever heard anything like this," one attendee murmured. "It's not just skill, it's like she's telling a story with her hands," another said. Even those who were unfamiliar with music terminology could feel the extraordinary quality of the performance. The beauty was in its accessibility. Anyone could feel it, regardless of background or experience. The woman's ability to convey emotion was remarkable. Each phrase of the music seemed to reflect a life lived fully, with its joys and sorrows, its quiet moments and its triumphs. The audience could sense the humanity in every note, a reminder that music was not merely an art form, but a means of communication, of connection, and of understanding. It was a gift, freely given, yet deeply personal, shared in a way that left an indelible mark on everyone present. As the performance reached its peak, the music took on a grandeur that filled the room completely. The melody soared, weaving intricate patterns that seemed impossible to anticipate, yet flowed naturally from her fingers. People felt an overwhelming sense of awe, their hearts racing with the intensity of the moment. There was a shared recognition that this was no ordinary performance. It was a rare glimpse into something transcendent, a moment that would linger in memory long after the notes faded. The conclusion of the piece was gentle, almost fragile, a delicate touch that allowed the final notes to linger in the air like a soft echo. The silence that followed was profound, a collective pause in which everyone absorbed the enormity of what had just happened. And then, gradually, applause began to rise, quiet at first, then swelling into a chorus of genuine admiration. People stood, clapping, cheering, some with tears in their eyes, unable to contain the emotions that the music had stirred. Afterward, the woman rose from the piano with her usual modest grace. She nodded to the audience, acknowledging their appreciation without seeking it, and returned to her seat quietly. The room remained alive with energy, but there was also a sense of reflection. People had been touched, moved, and inspired, and they carried the experience with them in a way that would last long after the evening ended. In the days that followed, the impact of her performance became even clearer. Conversations in the community shifted, with people sharing their experiences and insights. Parents spoke to their children about the power of quiet dedication and talent, emphasizing that extraordinary gifts often emerge without fanfare. Neighbors reflected on the beauty of simplicity, recognizing that greatness does not always announce itself loudly or demand attention. Local musicians found themselves inspired to practice with renewed passion. They attempted to emulate the emotional depth they had witnessed, striving not merely for technical accuracy, but for the same level of expressive power. While none could fully replicate her touch, the inspiration she provided created a ripple effect, elevating the entire community's appreciation for music. Even those who were not musicians found themselves influenced by her presence. People who had previously felt indifferent to music began to notice it in new ways, listening to melodies in daily life with greater awareness, savoring the subtle emotions they evoked. Her performance had opened a door, showing them that music could be more than entertainment. It could be a source of connection, reflection, and inspiration. The woman herself remained humble. She did not claim credit for the impact she had made. She performed for the joy of playing, for the satisfaction of creating beauty, and for the quiet hope that her music might touch others. Fame and recognition were not her goals. She understood that true artistry lies in authenticity, in the ability to convey emotion and meaning, and in the willingness to share one's gift with humility. Over time, her performances became anticipated events, not because of spectacle, but because of the emotional resonance they carried. People attended with expectation, hoping to experience the quiet wonder that had first captured their hearts. Each appearance reinforced the lesson that talent and humility could coexist, that greatness often manifests subtly, and that the most profound experiences are sometimes found in ordinary settings. Stories of her playing spread beyond the immediate community. Friends shared the experience with relatives, colleagues spoke of it at work, and even strangers who had heard second-hand accounts came to listen for themselves. The fascination was not merely with her skill, but with the way she communicated through music, connecting hearts and minds without words. Despite the attention and admiration, she remained grounded in her quiet life. She continued to move through the community with the same calm presence, attending events, walking in familiar streets, and observing the world with thoughtful eyes. Her modesty and grace only added to the admiration people felt for her, reinforcing the idea that extraordinary talent does not require recognition to be meaningful. In every note she played, there was a sense of purpose and humanity. The music carried her experiences, her sensitivity, and her understanding of life's complexities. Listeners felt it in a visceral way, as though the music resonated directly with their own experiences. It was a rare gift, one that could not be taught or replicated, a deeply personal expression that touched anyone fortunate enough to hear it. Through her performances, she reminded people of the beauty of simplicity and the power of authenticity. Her music became a symbol of inspiration, not because it was flashy or elaborate, but because it was real, heartfelt, and transformative. She showed that even the smallest gesture, sitting down to play a simple tune, could create moments of profound wonder and connection. And so, the woman continued her quiet journey, leaving behind a legacy that was felt rather than seen. Her music rippled through the community, inspiring creativity, reflection, and a deeper appreciation for life's subtle beauties. Every performance reinforced the truth that talent combined with humility and authenticity could astonish, inspire, and connect people in ways words could never fully capture. The days following her last performance were filled with quiet reflection. For those who had witnessed it, people replayed the music in their minds, not simply the notes, but the feeling, the emotions that had washed over them. It was impossible to forget the subtle power in every chord, the way the melody seemed to speak directly to each listener's heart. Conversations often drifted back to that evening, even among strangers, as if simply speaking about it could capture a piece of the magic. The woman remained her modest, unassuming self. She moved through the community as before, greeting neighbors with polite nods and soft smiles. She carried herself with the same calm grace that had always characterized her presence. She did not seek recognition, and she did not perform for praise. Yet, everyone who encountered her could sense that there was something quietly extraordinary about her. Her talent was evident, not because of showmanship or words, but because of the way her presence seemed to carry depth, kindness, and a subtle power. Rumors and speculation about her past began to circulate among the community. People wondered if she had once performed professionally or studied music at a renowned institution. Some imagined that she had traveled the world, playing for audiences who may never have truly appreciated her gift. Others thought perhaps her talent had been nurtured privately, in quiet rooms and empty halls, until it was ready to reveal itself fully. No one could be sure, and perhaps that was part of the fascination. The mystery added to the allure, making each appearance of hers feel like an event to be treasured. Meanwhile, the impact of her music began to ripple further than anyone expected. Local students who had been present at her performances started to practice with renewed dedication. They studied not just technique, but emotion, expression, and the subtle art of connecting with the listener. Teachers noticed the change, remarking that students seemed more aware, more thoughtful in their approach to music. It was as if a spark had been ignited, a quiet understanding that music was not merely about playing notes, but about communicating feeling and truth. Even adults, many of whom had long since set aside musical pursuits, found themselves inspired. Some returned to instruments they had abandoned years ago, picking up dusty guitars or keyboards to explore the joy they had once known. Others simply listened more attentively, savoring melodies on the radio or in recordings, noticing details they had previously overlooked. The woman's performances had reminded people that beauty often exists in subtle forms, and that ordinary moments could be transformed into extraordinary experiences. if one approached them with attention and care. Despite the growing admiration, she never allowed herself to be drawn into the spotlight. She continued to perform occasionally, always with humility, always with the same gentle grace. Each performance was a gift, not a statement. She played not for fame or acclaim, but because music was a part of her, and because she understood the quiet power it held to move people, to inspire them, and to connect them with something larger than themselves. One evening, the community gathered once again for a casual recital. Though no one could have predicted the impact this particular performance would have, the room was filled with anticipation, not because the audience expected fireworks or spectacle, but because they remembered the quiet astonishment of previous evenings. The woman approached the piano with her usual calm demeanor, greeted by warm smiles and murmured greetings. There was no fanfare, no dramatic entrance, just the soft presence of someone who carried her music within her. When she began to play, the melody started softly, deceptively simple, drawing listeners in with a gentle touch. Each note seemed to float in the air, delicate yet deliberate. The audience leaned forward instinctively, sensing that even in simplicity there was power. The music unfolded slowly, allowing time for each phrase to resonate fully. There was a quiet intimacy to the performance, a sense that the woman was speaking directly to each listener, yet without words, without explanation. As the piece developed, its complexity became apparent. Layers of harmony and subtle variation emerged, each note carefully crafted to evoke feeling. The music seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting, sometimes urgent, sometimes gentle, but always purposeful. The audience felt it deeply, moved by the ebb and flow of emotion that carried through every chord. Even those unfamiliar with musical theory understood, instinctively, that they were witnessing something rare. Children sat spellbound, their usual restlessness forgotten. Adults closed their eyes, letting themselves be carried by the melody. Some felt tears prickle their eyes, not from sadness, but from awe, from the sheer beauty and humanity embedded in the music. The room seemed to hold its breath, united in a shared experience that transcended language, age, and background. For a few precious moments, everyone was connected by the quiet power of the woman's playing. Her hands moved across the keys with fluidity, each movement precise yet natural. There was a rhythm and flow to her playing that seemed instinctive, as though she were drawing the music from within herself rather than simply performing it. The audience could feel the depth of her understanding, the years of quiet practice, the sensitivity to emotion, and the commitment to connecting with those who listened. Every pause, every accent, every subtle shift carried meaning. The melody swelled, carrying the room along its journey. The music was both strong and tender, powerful yet understated, creating an emotional landscape that seemed to encompass the full spectrum of human experience. Listeners felt joy, longing, hope, and nostalgia, all at once. It was a reminder that music, when played with true feeling, has the capacity to touch souls in a way that words never could. By the time the piece reached its conclusion, the audience was completely absorbed. The final notes lingered in the air, soft and fragile, like a delicate whisper that demanded attention. Silence followed, profound and respectful, before applause slowly began, tentative at first, then swelling into heartfelt appreciation. People rose to their feet, clapping and cheering, some wiping away tears, some simply staring in awe. The woman nodded quietly, acknowledging their admiration with modesty, then returned to her seat without a word. In the days that followed, the performance became a defining moment in the community. People spoke of it endlessly, recounting the emotion, the subtlety, and the mastery they had witnessed. Conversations that once revolved around everyday concerns now often included reflections on music, artistry, and the unexpected ways beauty can enter life. Her playing had reminded them to pay attention, to listen, and to recognize that the extraordinary often exists in ordinary moments. Those who had met her personally remarked on the contrast between her talent and her demeanor. She remained humble, approachable, and gentle, never allowing the admiration she inspired to change her. People found inspiration not only in her music, but in her way of being, her humility, her patience, and her quiet confidence. She showed that greatness need not be loud to be impactful, and that true artistry often comes with a calm presence and a generous heart. Local musicians continued to be influenced by her performances. They studied her approach not merely for technical lessons, but for insight into emotional expression and connection. Teachers spoke of her work to their students, emphasizing that the essence of music is not just in skill, but in honesty, feeling, and the ability to touch others through creativity. Young learners were inspired, motivated to explore their own potential, realizing that talent combined with humility could create something unforgettable. Even those who had never played an instrument felt inspired by her. People who had previously ignored music began to listen more attentively, noticing details in everyday sounds, appreciating melodies and rhythms in ways they hadn't before. Her performances became more than entertainment, they were lessons in awareness, in sensitivity, and in the beauty of being fully present. Despite the growing recognition, the woman remained focused on the joy of creation itself. She never sought the spotlight, never asked for praise, and never let herself be carried away by admiration. Her purpose was simple: to play, to share, and to connect. And in doing so, she left a profound mark on everyone who heard her. A mark that was not only about music, but about life, emotion, and the quiet power of human expression. Over time, her story became a cherished part of the community's collective memory. People spoke of the nights when her music transformed ordinary gatherings into unforgettable experiences. The tale spread further, inspiring those who heard it secondhand to pay attention to the hidden talents around them, to appreciate the beauty and humility, and to remember that even the simplest act, a single person playing a tune, can astonish and inspire. Her influence continued to ripple outward, touching lives in subtle ways. Individuals who had attended her performances carried her example into their own endeavors. Whether in music, art, or everyday interactions, they were reminded that true impact often comes quietly, without fanfare, and that sharing one's gift sincerely can leave a lasting impression on others. The woman herself remained a mystery in many ways. People wondered about her past, her training, and her